Hello and welcome to today's Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. I'm Jason Rader, and I'll be your host today as we talk about the evolution of multi-cloud. And we've got two familiar faces with us today that are going to help cover this topic, and I think really in depth today. Let me introduce Carm Tagliente, who's our Chief Data Officer, as well as a distinguished technologist. And we've got Michael Nardone, who is Managing Director for Public Cloud and a distinguished technologist himself. Two very distinguished guests today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Great to be here again.
Well, we've had a lot of fun talking about, in preparation for today's discussion, talking about the evolution of multi-cloud. You know, where should we start? I kind of like to set the stage as far as what are we talking about with multi-cloud? What, let's get started there. Who wants to take a shot at that?
Wow. Michael, you want me to go first? I'll go first. So round about 2006, when AWS initially started to create an offering. Well, anyways, I'm not going to go do a history lesson, but in general, sort of the evolution of computing really led itself toward this concept of being able to create public-based services, which allowed organizations that maybe spent a lot of money and time and cost in the data center to be able to move to managed services that were available in a private environment or a public environment managed by a private organization. What it did was it accelerated our time to delivery, but it also reduced costs. So the idea of creating a cloud really caught on. And then, of course, there were a number of different organizations that were able to offer the same kinds of services for different reasons. Okay, so like, for example, AWS was really good at being able to support Amazon and to be able to make sure that they could run their own website and, sell products. So they created an infrastructure that allowed them to do that. Google obviously managing tons of data. So of course they had to have the ability to be able to manage large sets of data. So they sort of went at it a different way, but ultimately came to the same conclusion that they could make these services public. And then let's take Microsoft as the last example. I won't go into all. Probably there are probably dozens of cloud providers, but I won't go there. But Microsoft, same thing from the enterprise, the ability to be able to take not only the operating system, but the services and enterprise applications that they had and move them to the cloud, same kind of thing. So offering those services then without having to also support the infrastructure that went along with it. So then organizations really looked at it from the perspective of, well, do I use one cloud or are certain clouds better at other types of things? So we ended up in this model of the multi-cloud. So many organizations, I think the last number I saw was 2.5 or 3 or maybe 3.5 clouds. So all organizations are using cloud for something. And the definition of cloud in those contexts could be something, you might even say external services like a rack space, potentially. It could be a cloud service for them because they don't manage the infrastructure. But that's a lot of talking. And you're right, we are going deep. So sorry about that. But in the general, that's kind of how we got here. And so really what we see over time, and I'll pass it off to Michael in a second to comment on, but basically what we're seeing is that organizations come to us a lot and say, well, which cloud do we use? Which one's better at this? Or which one's more cost effective? Or where can I get better resiliency or elasticity? And so we'll talk about a lot of these concepts today, I'm sure, as we go through the process. And of course, I'm going to want to talk about AI, so we'll get there eventually. But Michael, comments?
Yeah, so thank you, Carm. Right, I love getting kind of the overview and history of cloud computing there. But again, we think about at the heart of it, right, where cloud really genesis was being able to consume democratized services, right? We think of how we used to procure and provision and kind of the use cases we could do with legacy IT pre-cloud, right? And then cloud computing as a paradigm, it just really took off, right? It was how, we talked about web scale and cloud scale companies, right? What if you couldn't buy, like in the case of Amazon, right, an off-the-shelf product from a traditional IT vendor to meet the size, scale, scope, and requirements that you had, right? And so it's really interesting to see that cloud computing was born out of a lot of how can I consume things in a different way, maybe as a service now, to fulfill my own needs, right? And then expose those in a pretty reasonable fashion, right? And sell them and monetize them externally, right? Much in the case of AWS, Microsoft, we can talk through IBM, of course, clouds like Google Cloud, right? So just this whole ecosystem, right? But I really think multi-cloud just boils down to what we like to say, it's the new normal, right? As Carm said, you're likely most everyone with us today is operating in 2.5 to 3 clouds, right? Regardless of even your SaaS type investments, right? So multi-cloud is really the new normal, right? When you look at how do I take advantage of industry differentiated solutions, right, and capabilities across the clouds. The reality is that it's really not one cloud fits all today, right? There's so many rich capabilities and use cases that are unlocked, right? I won't steal Carm's thunder around Gen AI, but just different model selections, right? Different partnerships there that you want to avail yourself of. So again, as we like to say, most everyone is multi-cloud nowadays. I saw a statistic that we have about 98% of customers identify as multi-cloud today. So from our perspective, it's the new normal, and how can we help you be successful in those multiple clouds?
Love it. So to establish a certain amount of dominance in this conversation, I'm going to talk about our survey that we had. So thank you, everybody. We had a lot of engagement with the survey. We appreciate you guys helping us out here, because the question this week was, when you think about multi-cloud, what do you view as top priority? And the possible answers were security, cost, skills, and containerization. Well, security overwhelmingly was, and I think it was a little bit about how the question was asked, to be fair, but 81% was the number associated with the top priority from that perspective with security. Second was cost at 14. Third was skills at 5, and containerization 0. Carm shed a little bit of a tear on that one, but we talked about, and again, I think it could have been how the question was asked. Nobody's going to say that security is not a top priority right now. So maybe that was how we kind of led the answers there. But I think as we talk about the modernization and the evolution of cloud, containerization is definitely going to be something we have to talk about, right?
For sure. And I'll address maybe the security side of it first, and I'll talk a little bit about, I think, why many organizations think of it as a concern. And it's not so much necessarily that the public clouds, especially the more popular ones, are somehow a vulnerability. But I think it's more, what services and policies do I want to enforce? And then how can I do that in the cloud? And so the ability to be able to sort of extend, and Jason, this is your area, but it's, how do I extend my policies and my risk assessment frameworks to extend to the cloud if I don't really have ownership of the infrastructure that supports it? So one of the things that I really love about all of the cloud providers that we typically work with is they have a shared responsibility model. So they're very open with what is your responsibility and what's our responsibility. And so you can actually look at it from the perspective of gaining trust with respect to things like, do you have to worry about the protection of the equipment, the physical access to the equipment? Well, no, it's in the cloud. That's just a simple example. But in general, sometimes it's really just a matter of education, understanding what it is the cloud provider gives you and what they expect your responsibility to be. And I was a little bit enamored. So I teach classes in AWS certification. And so I just discovered that there's a new load balancer type called the Gateway Load Balancer. And it basically it securely connects devices at the gateway protocol layer, which is the OSI layer 3. And I was like, holy cow. It's like, I didn't realize that there was a provision to do that, to help to increase the connection of appliances at that protocol layer, because it's less susceptible than layer 4 or layer 7. So again, it's like, these are really sort of innovations that start to address some of the concerns that organizations might have around security. And all the cloud providers are going to be doing this kind of thing. But I think it's fascinating to understand how to approach it. And for a lot of organizations, I think sometimes the concerns about security aren't so much that they believe that the cloud providers are not protecting their data or their applications, but it's more, they may not know how to use it to be able to achieve the objective that they're looking to achieve. And so that's part of what we do as we work with organizations to help them to understand a little bit better.
To me, that's typically the biggest abstraction to people from I think multi-cloud is what tags security as well, because there was a time where there was this concern whether we can maintain the same level of security off-prem in another provider's environment versus our own. I think nobody's super concerned about that these days. They understand there's a level, maybe even more secure, to your point, because that shared responsibility, the hyperscalers might do that even better at the layers they're responsible for. But the point is you typically have a skill set of your people who are used to doing X. And if we add X plus Y into the equation for them to try to understand the native security controls of this cloud and potentially others, that complexity is the opposite of security usually. And that's where I think a lot of people are concerned. And then we get into, control plane conversations, which I'll kind of hand that ball off to Michael.
Yeah, so I do want to caveat that this survey is 2 weeks or so removed from global impacting outage, right? So no surprise that security was obviously top of mind in everything that we do. So Jason and Carm brought up, I think. So I think Jason and Carm brought up some tremendous points there. And so when we think about it, it's not that the clouds providers are viewed as insecure, but they give you native tools that you have to avail and make use of to make the cloud secure. We've also seen whole new classes of tools, right? So we have things like cloud native app protection platforms like CNAPP, cloud security posture management, right? And so when we see really the best elements of kind of unified control planes and being able to apply security policy holistically, the vendors and partners that really get it right are the ones that acknowledge and understand that the native controls, you're not going to get away from those things like Security Command Center in Google or Defender for Azure or Guard Duty in AWS. These are native tools. They understand native hierarchies and structures. It's those class of tools that can provide an abstraction and layer on top of those, right? To normalize your security, make it more accessible for your security engineers and analysts. And so the goal is not to replace the native controls, but to complement those and really sit as kind of a scaffold on top of those. And when you can master those things and have the right partnerships, it really helps you become secure across multiple clouds. 3 or 4 years ago, Jason, if you had asked that question, there weren't really classes of tools that did security really well across the providers. And luckily we've seen, kind of those shifts in the ecosystem to where today, we can point to a lot of the work that we've done and said, this is how we can help you be secure across multiple providers.
Indeed.
One thing that I just want to reemphasize a little bit what you said, Jason, before, and to Michael's point, but the complexity, I think, is the challenge. So there is no common layer, if you will, across all the clouds or even on-prem, which is going to allow you to be able to define your policies, for example. And one of the courses I teach, yes, I teach a lot of courses, but is a NIST and how to implement the NIST security posture policies within the cloud. And so you can look for, and each one of the cloud providers have really nice mappings of these particular services address these particular categories, subcategories of the NIST framework in order to be able to achieve, your degree of policy framework that you want to carry forward within your organization. The problem is that not every one of them, there's no sort of common calculus that says, if I write, using whatever syntactical language, a policy, and I give it to AWS, they're going to do it this way. And they're all going to be able to interpret that common definition as a sort of a centralized mechanism for driving policy. It doesn't happen that way. You have to do all the homework that is associated with, if I want to achieve success with a particular category, subcategory within the NIST framework, I've got to, in Google, I do it this way. In AWS, I do it this way. In Azure, I do it another way. And that gets complex, to your point. So that is another reason why I think we, not so much, again, it's not about the fact that it's insecure, but it's complexity in enforcing security. And I think that's another important part. And then just add on top of the monitoring side of it too, right? So now common monitoring through those policies is another complexity on top of it. And it's not all bad, but it's hard.
Well, I think you nailed it. It's one of those things where we've been, and I think it's like Wiz.io is a company that's come to mind. I mean, Google offered $23 billion to them to acquire them, and they were like, no, thank you, because of their values just coming up from a CNAPP perspective, from just a universal control plane perspective. And and Michael, you could talk more about this if you like, but I just think that those are the things that are helping folks get past some of that complexity and giving back to that skill set aspect. I think even though that was only 5% in the survey, that's still a big deal. Executives want to know that their people know what's going on. They don't want the people to go, oh, well, it's just magic, it's happening in the cloud, we hope it's right. So I think that having something that can verify that and manage it, and not just implement it, but you nailed it. Monitor it and audit it and correct it is a big aspect to that. Anything from you, Michael?
Yeah, when we think about those class of tools, like Wiz.io came to mind, of course, top and center there, things like Palo Alto, Prisma Cloud, and others. It is again about providing that kind of key level of abstraction, right? Being able to author a security runbook, and to Carm's point, have that runbook understand that there is a CIS benchmark, right, foundational that's going to feed into the NIST CSF. That it is going to be able to report on, monitor, and even up to enforce through some of those native policy controls. And again, those class of tools are relatively nascent in the industry, right? This was a big challenge 3 to 4 years ago. The tools continue to evolve, but the opportunity for a security analyst or engineer to write that run book or use an abstracted language, right? We really like open policy agent, right? Instrumenting into those Kubernetes and those containerized environments, right? Being able to use a language like Rego to write that once and then have it enforced many times, but have it at least context aware of here's the benchmark and what you need to be secured, which again, conceptually, a part of the framework, it's the same in Azure, AWS, GCP, et cetera. But the actual practical implementation with the native controls and native policy can be wildly different syntactically. So anytime we can make that and reduce that cognitive load on our security engineers and analysts is going to give us success. And then making it really simple and accessible is exactly what those tools are aiming to do.
Right.
Beautiful.
So, and Jason, you want me to spin in some containerization now on top of all this?
Yeah, now's the right time to talk about it, I think, because we were, I was joking in the green room about, my thought was, why can't we make it so that we can move our cloud workloads to another cloud when it's more advantageous from a cost perspective? You brought up egress, which is totally the reason why we're not necessarily doing that, but also just the technology has, with these unified control planes and those kinds of talk more about containerization, because I think everybody cares, and it should be more than 0 in the survey, to be fair.
Right. Well, I think and I'll go a little bit sort of futuristic as we think about it in the grand scheme of things. So, but if we can think about containerizations as sort of I'll call it decoupled functional capabilities that you want to be able to use in any executable environment that you may want, where you want to run it. So we refer to this usually as workload management or workload placement. But if you can embed or inherit the security posture or policies that you want to employ directly within those components themselves, then you can start to have sort of this, traveling security show. So you can start to take the security policies and posture, embed them in the container itself, and then then you have this sort of common mechanism to be able to say, well, here's how I'm going to enforce this common security posture as my workload distributes from cloud to cloud. So instead of sort of trying to create a model where I can sort of top-down project this onto the cloud provider and their services, I'm embedding it at the functional layer and then letting the security actually move along with wherever that executable may occur. So that, and we're not quite there yet. And Michael always knows, he stays so abreast of the tools that are in the market. There's probably a tool that already does this today, but that's kind of where I would see things going at some point. But it feels like that's sort of a logical way to sort of couple the securitization of these components, or at least to the extent that you can, at the functional layer. Not so much the permissionality or authorization, but it's more of the, what does this function do, and what are the security opportunities, or I hate to use the word constraints all the time, but what are the security opportunities that might be available as part of the functional characteristics of what I'm offering with this service.
Yeah. And before you chime in, Michael, I just want to acknowledge Clifford's comment. Thanks so much, Clifford. He's just basically talking about the skill sets, from a single cloud environment are already complicated, and going into a multi-cloud environment, it's more difficult, assumedly. So thanks, Clifford, for your comment. We appreciate that.
Yeah, and I do think from Clifford's comment, right, we typically see mastery in multiple clouds begins with proficiency and maturity in a single cloud. No organization wakes up overnight and is proficient across any cloud that's thrown at it. They're securing it, they're managing it, they're governing it. They have modern observability and compound SLAs. These things are all on a maturity curve in models. So we typically see, that mastery of a single provider, right? You've understood, you've made the investment, you have the default, and then you're able to aggregate these capabilities on top of it. Yeah, I think that was a great point by Clifford that, hey, one can be tough enough. How do you actually mature and grow into, multiple clouds, availed for your organization?
Just a quick comment on that one. So, having exposure to a lot of different clouds as you do, Michael, and Jason, you do as well. It's the most interesting thing about this is at the end of the day, these are computing infrastructures. So they all have the same basic core set of capabilities. So even though, the cloud providers like AWS or Google or Microsoft or IBM or whoever, they didn't invent cloud services. They are basically just taking advantage of advances in computing and virtualization and data storage. And so the if you bubble it down to what are the core capabilities, like network, for example, if you look at a VPC, well, a VPC is a VPC is a VPC in any one of the cloud providers. And they all have the same concept. They have subnets, they have ACLs, they have firewalls and security groups. So like, they may call them different things, which I think is the complexity of understanding how to use them. But they are providing the same capabilities, or else they wouldn't be a cloud provider. So I think again, when you get to the PaaS layer and you start moving up the chain a little bit, that I think is where the confusion comes in, because certain organizations are like, here's our competitive advantage. We're going to provide, additional features that cannot be provided by any other cloud provider. But I think the core capabilities are the same. And if you look at it from that perspective, it sort of makes it a little bit easier to understand like what is going on across multiple clouds.
So are you advocating for PaaS, or are you saying PaaS is PaaS is PaaS?
I think again, it's I hate to like take the middle of the road, but I'll give you sort of a very political response. I think it is for services, and you brought up this point earlier, and I agree with you. If you really don't know a lot about security, for example, and you can use PaaS services like a web application firewall that somebody's providing for you as a service, then you don't want to go out and hire a security expert. So take advantage of the fact that one of the cloud provider security experts created this thing, and I guarantee you it's going to be a million times better than you're going to just make up on your own. So in those cases, PaaS services might make a lot of sense if you really don't have the expertise to do it. But if you do have the expertise to do it and you want the tools and facilities to do it, then go ahead and take advantage of what the cloud provider is able to give you. And it allows you to also be more agnostic in terms of, I don't care which cloud it is, because I know exactly what I want to implement on each one of them without relying on the PaaS service. How's that for a political?
And you don't have to be political. You can give me your honest opinion. I mean, that probably was your honest opinion. I'm just saying we'll accept any slant. Michael, you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, really to kind of distill down, kind of Carm's position there, it's, learning multiple cloud providers is much like learning whether you're written or spoken language, or maybe your first programming language, that after you get the first one under your belt, the subsequent ones are easier and easier, right? You have some common base of knowledge and things to, go back to. I won't pick on Carm too much, right? There are definitely some design and architectural differences, even something as simple as a VPC or what we call VNet in Azure. There are definitely some fundamental protocol and differences under the covers, but for the most part, we're providing that same commonality. And when you adopt multi-cloud, find that commonality across the providers. It's what's really going to help you be successful.
Right, and that kind of brings us to, I know Carm probably wants to talk about AI, but I mean, so capabilities of the different providers. We always talk about this, and even in PaaS, the lock-in potential factor, but sometimes there's just a compelling reason to use a certain provider or whatever. Are we at a point, and you mentioned some interesting stuff from NVIDIA announcements a week or two ago. Do you want to kind of go into that?
Yeah, so so again, I'll probably give you the same type of answer that I gave you on the whole security model, but so there are frameworks that are being built that allow you to be able to run faster with AI, for example. So, if you're going to use Microsoft services, then you could use, the Azure services in order to be able to sort of spin up a RAG strategy relatively quickly without having to worry about all of the Python libraries, or even going one step deeper, which is like, how do I write all the CUDA code to be able to operationalize the fact that I'm using the GPU in the most effective way? It's like, well, nobody wants to worry about that usually. But there may be people that do. But if you want to just sort of stand up a chatbot application, so you can use something like Azure Copilots, for example, and you can use the suite of tools that are available to be able to create a Copilot relatively easily. Well, same thing with NVIDIA has something called Nemo. Nemo does effectively the same thing. You can write a chatbot relatively quickly. It runs on-prem, doesn't run in the hardware in the cloud. But generally, you're doing the same thing, but you're really working at this high level of abstraction from the AI perspective. And NVIDIA is actually moving down this path too of something called NIMS, so containerizing the AI application so that you can actually deploy it to almost anywhere. So now when you think about, it's not so much that they're really looking at and saying, hey, you have to buy NVIDIA hardware. They're really focusing on, which I like this approach. They really want you to use the GPU no matter where it is. So they're kind of becoming a cloud company at the end of the day. But they're really saying, they're really banking on this fact that distribution of workload could be anywhere. So if you create this NIMS containerized AI application, I don't care if you run it in Azure or in AWS or Google or on-prem, or whether it's Dell hardware or it's NVIDIA hardware, I don't care. You're still using the GPU model, and as you start to move this forward, and I think that's sort of maybe it is a sort of a future-looking perspective on where things are going, to our container conversation just a little bit earlier. And then you can also see agent-based applications now, which is, again, I'll geek out on the AI side a little bit, but there's the the LLM, Gen AI kind of classical approaches that we have typically been thinking about, but agent-based solutions are going to start to become more about goal seeking. You want to accomplish a particular goal. Well, the agent will know how to do that. And lo and behold, and Michael and I talk a lot about this, is I may want to run where the data is. So I may want to say, hey, that application could navigate to whatever cloud or whatever computing environment where the actual data is. And so proximity to data might be how that application runs, and that's how you do workload placement. So now all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is really getting interesting in terms of like how we think about AI approaches, but also multi-cloud approaches, because now they become, it's a data gravity issue potentially, or it's a proximity to the user. Intelligent edge, another good example. Maybe I run on the edge. Maybe I run near the data. You pick the distribution mechanism, and off you go. So there you go. There's a whole nother conversation embedded in there, I know, but that's kind of
containerization plus AI. I mean, that's like got to be the thing that's just making your brain explode.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the key multi-cloud really takeaways, right, when Carm talked about the NVIDIA story, is NVIDIA's DGX cloud, right? How they distribute software and give you models for whether it's their full cloud offering as what I would call model or training as a service, right, down to intelligent agents like RAGs at the edge, and into even AI powered PCs, right, at some point, right, and leveraging the GPU within a client device. Is all of that software and all of that portability is happening through container platforms, right? So all of that NVIDIA software, everything you see within that cloud environment, so many of the hybrid cloud solutions across providers, right, that run at the edge that can do this, again, models at the edge here, are completely based upon those portable platforms, right? So we talked about, do you go the PaaS service, or maybe you want to avoid lock-in, right? That's where we're really seeing this class of Kubernetes and container-based runtimes that actually assist you in making portable workloads and even helping us become more interoperable amongst clouds. So again, Carm has another amazing talk track on what he just went over, but I really think it's cool to kind of extract those bits of, okay, how does that support a multi-cloud strategy and help me be successful?
Yeah.
And also, I think it's probably
thanks for grounding us.
Oh, sorry.
No, I said thanks for grounding us. It's kind of funny. Juan usually does this for me too. It's like, what Carm really said was this. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, it's in my contract. I have to say resiliency in conversations as well. So, I mean, also that containerized approach gives us a one-up on resiliency as well. And I think, so sure. It turns out that the 0% survey question turns out to be the key to kind of what we've been talking about in the evolution of cloud. We're going to see more aspects of containerization. We're going to see, it's going to affect the skill factor. It's obviously going to affect cost, because I would think that costs, once the containerized, that rinse and repeat aspect of that seems to me it's going to be more cost effective once you've got it sorted out. and the security can be baked in. So is it that containers is the answer to evolution of the multi-cloud environment? Arm's nodding. What about you, Michael? And totally throw me under the bus if you don't think that's the right assessment.
So I would say, based on where we've learned through, EC2 being released 2006, keep me honest there, Carm, containers have arrived as kind of the best of how we can deliver that and disseminate that today. One of the best parts about working in technology as we do is the fact that we maybe won't know what's next, but boy, we're excited to see it. But as it stands today, containers are absolutely that best portable runtime that we've seen. It's the best in class of what you have to avail yourself with today.
Yeah, I guess I see what you're saying. It's not necessarily that there's new breakthrough. It's just that they seem to be prolific. And now it's probably more back to that control plane that we were talking about is more important to the evolution than just about anything.
Yeah, and I think just one final point. You guys are spot on. It's really, can we allow the container to be the sort of that central point of maybe data management, securitization, so that it can travel with the workload or the function. So can I allow things, the characteristics, not just of what the function does in the container, but also its characteristics, which are things like, whatever it's data provenance, it's or the data provenance for what it may create, or the securitization of the data, or even the connection history that could be associated with who should I connect to and under what circumstances, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really kind of a unifying concept, I think, generally, because we talk about decoupled architectures. You brought up the point of resiliency. There's high availability, there's performance, there's elasticity. All of that should span the multiple cloud. Like Michael and I 2 or 3 years ago were doing sort of this federated cloud talk track, but it was like, I think it was early. And I think now we're started getting to the point where it's becoming a lot more real. Because of the companies are embracing containerization or containers today as a common substrate.
Awesome. Well, it's probably a good place to wrap up. It sounds like we've got a lot more conversations we need to have, but I super appreciate you guys being here and helping this conversation become more rich and complete. And I think any parting words that you guys would like to offer to folks that are out there thinking about their own evolution of multi-cloud?
Well, for containers, no, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I would just say, our number 2 response there on the survey around cost, right? We didn't get to go deep on the cost side, but much like we talked about through security, new classes of tools and ecosystem available. One of the things we're really excited about, there's the new focus spec for really normalization of cloud consumption data. It can be really hard to compare apples to apples, right, across the big 3 hyperscalers there, and having a focus, that specification for data is what's actually going to help you with cost management, spanning public clouds. It also leads to some really advanced, what I would call use cases of brokering compute, right? Whereas pound for pound, the best place to run, maybe my heavy hitting models, right? My HPC procurement and et cetera. So probably an entire talk track on itself, but the really nice part is that all the concerns that we saw, from the survey, there are some really nice solutions. And as Carm mentioned, 2 or 3 years ago, when we talked about that, right, a lot of those solutions or data normalization didn't exist. So again, a very exciting time if you're adopting multi-cloud today or thinking about it, right? Just a really great set of things to take a look at.
Yeah, no, one last point that I would make, and Jason, you brought this up, but it's basically, we need to make sure that we watch and learn as things are going, so that what we're talking about is not a disruption in terms of thinking about multi-cloud. It's an evolution, and so we're starting to enhance our ability to run within multiple clouds by satisfying some of the challenges that we have seen historically. Like, how many times have you heard a particular cloud provider, whatever the regional resources went down, the company was unable to continue to operate. So a lot of organizations are looking for, well, can't I just move my whole operation to another cloud and run it there? Well, maybe you can in the future. And so, I think for many of our listening community, but also for us, just making sure that you sort of follow along with where things are going. And it's not a panacea, because what we're talking about is really just sort of, we continue to add additional capabilities over time. And so, maybe 2 years from now, it's going to be all about workload placement in the future, but, which would be kind of exciting to talk about too. But I think, it's just sort of, it's a really important topic. stay tuned in, and I think it's really good to follow along.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. Cool conversation. And for those of you out there that, you've heard the experts' take on this particular topic, if you want to know more about what we do here at Insight, please visit us at insight.com. And we hope to see you next time. By the way, if you've got any, thank you for the comments. If you got any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out, comment on this, and we appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.